Good day. Welcome to Achieving Gender Equal Nationality Laws for Sustainable Development, sponsored by the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights in partnership with Equality Now, the permanent mission of the United States to the UN in New York, UNICEF, the UN Refugee Agency, and UN Women. My name is Catherine Harrington, and I'm the campaign manager of the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, a coalition of national and international organizations, independent activists, and UN partner agencies working together to end gender discrimination in nationality laws. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation, which I have the privilege of moderating. Before I continue, I just wanted to mention that we do have Arabic, French, and International Sign interpretation available. So I think at this point in our Zoom lives, most folks are probably familiar with how to use that. There's an icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have any trouble accessing the interpretation, you can send a message in the Q&A function. So we are now in the midst of the first week of the 10th session of the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, or the HLPF. Today, the HLPF will have a special focus on SDG 5 on gender equality, which is one of 5 SDGs undergoing in-depth reviews this year, including Goal 4 on education. So it is an opportune moment for us to focus our attention on why gender equal nationality laws are essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Despite progress in many areas to advance gender equality, approximately 50 countries today have nationality laws that deny women the same rights as men. 25 countries have nationality laws that deny women the right to pass nationality to their children at birth on an equal basis with men. Approximately 50 countries deny women the right to pass their citizenship to a non-citizen spouse on an equal basis with men. The links between gender equality and sustainable development have been well documented, and this is reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. This is unsurprising when you look at the costs of gender discrimination in nationality laws. At their core, gender discriminatory nationality laws undermine women's equal citizenship and their equality in the family. These discriminatory laws also cause other wide-ranging human rights violations and hardships experienced by affected families, including obstacles to accessing education, healthcare, employment, property rights, inheritance, even the right to nationality itself. In fact, gender discrimination in nationality laws is one of just a few root causes of statelessness, a status whereby an individual is not considered a citizen by any country. Today, we will hear from our esteemed panel of experts about the harm caused by these laws and why gender equal nationality laws are not only the right thing to do in order to respect the equality of citizens without sex-based discrimination, but it's also in countries' best interests. We will also learn about ongoing efforts being led by affected persons, civil society, UN agencies, and policymakers themselves to advance gender equal nationality rights in countries around the world. In times of conflict and crises, gender discrimination in nationality laws exacerbates the vulnerability of affected families, a fact made tragically clear as the world confronted the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the past several years, we've seen families affected by gender discriminatory nationality laws separated due to travel bans on non-citizens, and we saw women's non-citizen children and spouses denied equal access to COVID relief. The theme of this year's HLPF is building back better from COVID-19 while advancing the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. As you will hear from our panelists today, including an affected mother and activist, Dr. Josel Murray, we cannot build back better until these deeply harmful man-made laws are reformed to reflect women and men's equal citizenship. Simply put, sustainable development cannot be achieved without upholding gender equality in nationality laws. I'm really excited to get to our panelists, and I want to have plenty of time for discussion. So just a quick additional notes, including some logistical items. One, today, the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights Steering Committee member, Equality Now, has launched an updated version of their global report on gender discrimination in nationality laws. It is an excellent report, and I encourage you to read it. And there's a link that will be in the chat if it's not there already. One of the most impressive aspects of this report, in addition to providing an excellent overview of gender discrimination in nationality laws, is the report's annex. Now, this might seem like a strange recommendation, but the annex includes a section on each country where gender discrimination has been documented in the nationality law, with excerpts of the discriminatory text. So if you're not sure if your country is one of the countries with this form of discrimination, or you're surprised to see your country included on the list of countries with this discrimination, visit the annex and see exactly where reforms are needed in order for gender equality to be enshrined in nationality laws. I just want to lastly note that the chat function is available, and we encourage you to introduce yourselves and share resources that you think might be useful for this conversation. We will also have time for your questions to our panelists. And I encourage you to use the question and answers option, not the chat function, to add your questions. To have as much time for conversation, I'm not going to do long bio introductions here, but we will put some additional information about our panelists in the chat. So without further ado, it is my real honor to invite Dr. Josil Murray to join me and turn on her video. Dr. Murray is one of many Malaysian mothers impacted by Malaysia's gender discriminatory nationality law. Josil has a PhD in forestry and spent 7 years working for the United Nations, their food and agricultural organization. She's just recently returned back to Malaysia with her family. Dr. Josil, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'd love to just get started by asking you to share with all of us how gender discrimination in your country's nationality law has impacted you and your family. Thank you.
Good evening from Malaysia, but I guess it's good morning, good afternoon for everyone else around the world. Thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to speak on behalf of affected mothers in Malaysia. So yes, absolutely. I'm an affected mother, and gender discriminatory laws in Malaysia have greatly impacted me, my family, but also the lives of hundreds of women and their families in Malaysia. For those who are not familiar with the context of Malaysia, so the Malaysian Constitution allows Malaysian men married to non-citizen spouses to automatically pass on citizenship to their children wherever they are born in the world, but the same does not apply to women. So as a result, Malaysian women have to apply for citizenship for their children through a very inconsistent and uncertain process. And this is under a process called citizenship by registration. And this process could take something between 2 to 20 years, and there's no guarantee of approval. And so during this process, while waiting in a state of limbo, Malaysian women face anxiety, uncertainty, and some find themselves in situations of harm and violence because of such laws that we have in the country. And sadly, this impacts children. So children who are also living in this limbo have no access to affordable healthcare, education, as well as the simple right to live in the country of her mother's birthplace. So I'm one of hundreds of Malaysian mothers currently in a difficult situation because of such gender discriminatory laws in Malaysia. So I have been fighting for the right to confer automatic citizenship to my daughter from the moment I knew we couldn't make it home for her birth. So I consider myself a very progressive Malaysian woman, and I find the requirement or the need for a woman to return home to her country to give birth or lose the right to pass on citizenship something rather backward. While Malaysian men are allowed to live abroad, secure the jobs of their dreams, marry whoever they want, and have children wherever they choose, and then rightfully automatically pass on citizenship to their children. But women simply cannot have the same rights and privileges. And this is not a privilege, this is a basic right, in my opinion. So in spite of that, hundreds of women do try to return home every year to deliver their babies. So Malaysian women they're not naive. They know that if they don't go back, then they're in a difficult situation. But there's so many reasons why women don't get to go back eventually, or they have great plans to go back, but eventually don't make it home. This could include financial situations, poor health during pregnancy, jobs that simply don't allow women to take extended leave before due date, and a global pandemic. So for us, it was the global pandemic. COVID-19 meant that I couldn't go back to Malaysia from Bangkok, which is not very far away. And yeah, we were really gutted when we found out that as my pregnancy advanced, there was still no way to go back. Until almost 3 weeks before her delivery, we had to make a very tough decision on whether we should risk it and I go back alone, or I stay here in Bangkok with my husband. So the borders were closed, and when restrictions finally reduced, I was allowed to go back, but my British husband had to seek approval from the head of immigration in order to enter the country. And but in spite of our very strong justifications, such as citizenship and my health during pregnancy, our application got rejected. And so we had no choice but to give birth in Bangkok. But I think that was one of the first best decisions we made for our daughter. We chose to be together in a time where a lot of families were separated because of COVID. And we chose to start our family on the right note, to choose family and happiness. But it really saddens me to think that I had to choose happiness versus the right to citizenship. This shouldn't be something that's mutually exclusive, in my opinion. It's something that all citizens of Malaysia should have, happiness and the right to pass on citizenship to their children. So equal nationality rights is essential to achieving SDG 5 on gender equality. But from my interaction with hundreds of mothers, many of which are supported by this network of mothers by Family Frontiers, we know that failure to address discriminatory nationality laws directly impact a few other SDGs. And this includes SDG 3 on good health and well-being, SDG 4 on quality education, and SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. Our inability to return to Malaysia meant that there was a constant worry about her citizenship. And this has made me a very anxious person and a very anxious mother, which I usually am not. And now that our daughter's turning 2, we have to worry about her health care, we have to worry about her education, and then more importantly is her ability to continue to live in Malaysia. Unequal citizenship also affects men and boys. This is not a woman issue only. My husband, who now has to worry about the fact that if something were to happen to him, which he constantly does worry, and he does tell me that if something were to happen to me, he would like to know that I will be able to bring my daughter back to Malaysia with us to live with my family. And right now, this is not an option because she's a non-citizen child. So I'm very hopeful. I have applied for her Malaysian citizenship initially under the citizenship by registration, that is under the Article 15.2. Even if I know that there's only 1%, less than 1% chance of success under this application process. But more recently, earlier in the year, I submitted documents for her Malaysian citizenship when the Malaysian courts ruled in favor of us mothers, where I was then allowed to submit documents to get her citizenship. But if I was a man, I would receive her citizenship documents immediately. But because I am not, I am still waiting, and I have been waiting since January with no answers to any emails or no feedback from the registration department. So now there's a lot of waiting and seeing for me and my family, but we remain very hopeful that the government of Malaysia will respect its commitments made towards the SDGs, but also commitment made to children of Malaysia. And yeah, with that is a rather long story of how this has affected me, but this is not just my story. There are hundreds of Malaysian women who are in similar or worse situations, yeah, because of such laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your reflections on so many of the experiences that other mothers and families in your network are going through. I think you raised a few really important, or many important points in your intervention, and I think one that we always emphasize is that gender discrimination doesn't just hurt women and girls, it hurts men and boys, families, and really countries as a whole. And as you noted, there are, the Sustainable Development Goals are interrelated, and when one is impacted, all are impacted. But we know that many of the Sustainable Development Goals are especially damaged wherever this discrimination persists. I would love to now invite Mr. Patrick Iba, Deputy Director for Policy and Law at the Division of International Protection at the UN Refugee Agency, to join us. And thank you very much for your time today. I know UNHCR has been doing a lot to work on advancing gender equal nationality rights, including both as an important effort to eradicate statelessness and to uphold gender equality. And we hear from some political leaders in countries and regions around the world. Sometimes we hear this is a question of state sovereignty, and we can structure our nationality laws as we like. How would you respond to this position?
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed, Catherine. It's great to be invited to this critical event. But maybe before I turn to your question, Catherine, kindly allow me to first say my thanks to Dr. Murray for sharing her testimony and her story. What she said today is a reminder that the issue of nationality is not only a legal problem, but most importantly, that it is a human issue with profound consequences on people's lives. So really, thank you, Dr. Murray, for reminding us of this issue. And then to your question, Catherine, indeed, it is a recognized principle of international law that each state can determine under its national domestic legislation who are those who are its national. This discretion that is recognized to state is provided notably by the 1930 Hague Convention on certain questions relating to the conflict of nationality laws. And indeed, across the world, states do rely on different criteria relating to place of birth, relating to descent, relating to residence, or a combination of these and other factors to determine those who are their nationals. However, this important discretion that is recognized to state is not absolute. So states cannot do what they like. There are a number of important limitations to the discretion that is given to state. And I will be speaking to 4 of them. The first one is that the discretion that is recognized to states in matters of nationalities is limited by the fact that the laws on nationalities must be consistent with applicable international law norms and principles. This is explicitly provided under Article 1 of the 1930 Hague Convention on Conflict of Nationality Law, which stipulates that the laws on nationality of state shall be recognized by other states insofar as it is consistent with international conventions, international customs, and the principles of law generally recognized with regard to nationality. Secondly, with the emergence of human rights norms at global and regional level since the Second World War, nationality has been recognized as a fundamental human right. This is indeed clearly indicated in Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to a nationality." This right to nationality is so critical to our being human that it has been referred to by some as being the right to have rights, meaning that the right to nationality unlocks the enjoyment of other fundamental human rights that is recognized to all of us as human. The recognition of the right to nationality is reaffirmed in several global and regional human rights instruments. The consequence of the recognition of nationality as a human right is that states cannot arbitrarily deprive people of this right. And this is exactly what the Inter-American Court on Human Rights said in 1984 in an issue relating to Costa Rica. And I would like to quote what the Inter-American Court on Human Rights said. The court said that international law does impose certain limits on the broad powers enjoyed by states, and that the manner in which states regulate matters bearing on nationality cannot be deemed to be within their sole jurisdiction. And the court goes on to say that those powers of the states are also circumscribed by their obligation to ensure the full protection of human rights. The third reason why the power of states is limited insofar as nationality is concerned is because of the principle of non-discrimination. This principle is provided in a number of international treaties, including the Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and most importantly for today's discussion, nationality laws and the discretionary power of states in the context of nationality law is limited by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Cdaw. Article 9 of Cdaw does obligate states to grant women equal rights with men to acquire, to change, or to retain their nationality. As a result, courts in different jurisdictions across the world have indeed upheld the right to non-discrimination in the context of nationality law based on gender. This was the case in the celebrated decision of Botswana, the Untitled case in 1994, as well as it was also recently the case in a decision of the European Court of Human Rights in 2011, a decision known as Genovese versus Malta. Finally, the discretion of states in nationality issues is further limited by the obligation that is on states to ensure that they prevent statelessness. Statelessness indeed is the fact of having no nationality recognized by any state under the operation of its law. This obligation to prevent statelessness through nationality law is provided by the Convention on the Right of the Child. And as you all know, the Convention of the Right of the Child is a convention that is nearly universally ratified, which means that it provides obligation for almost all the states in the world. And that convention specifically protects every child's right to acquire a nationality. And it also puts a duty on states to avoid children being left stateless. This means that nationality laws that prohibit women from conferring their nationality on an equal basis as men and which will leave children stateless are contrary to the Convention of the Right of the Child, and as a result would violate international law. And I will stop here. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patrick. And I think that you made so many important points, and it is worth restating that international law does impose certain limits on states, in particular when we're talking about nationality laws and the obligation to have non-discrimination. At the same time, the obligation to protect against statelessness. And so I think, the good news is that these obligations also are in countries' best interests. So thank you so much for highlighting these important points. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you in our next round of questions. We have now, because the US Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, Uzra Zaya, is unfortunately traveling at this moment. So we do have Undersecretary Zaya's response in a pre-recorded video where she responded to the question of why gender equal nationality laws is an issue, a priority issue for the US government, why this is something that is viewed as so essential. And so I would love to invite my colleague to get that video started for us. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Uzra Zaya, and I'm the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important event. I'm honored to represent the United States, which has long championed women's right to nationality as a basic issue of gender equality and respect for human rights. Women's equal right to nationality is a critical aspect of democracy and of preventing and reducing statelessness. Over the past decade, the United States has highlighted women's equal right to nationality in UN Human Rights Council resolutions, at the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and in other multilateral and bilateral diplomatic efforts. Additionally, the United States is the largest single donor to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and strongly supports the agency's mandate to prevent and reduce statelessness and protect stateless persons. We continue to support civil society efforts to mobilize and advocate for reforms to eliminate arbitrary discrimination against women in nationality laws. When we set out to champion this issue over a decade ago, there were 30 countries around the world that didn't allow women to confer citizenship to their children on an equal basis with men. Today, that number is 25. We applaud this progress, but we want that number to be 0. Today's event examines how the impacts of discrimination against women in nationality laws reverberate, holding back progress for whole societies, impeding full and equal democratic participation in line with our Summit for Democracy goals, slowing economic development, and undermining efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda. The brave testimony of affected mothers like Dr. Joseal Murray and the energy of youth activists are tremendously inspiring and powerful. Their voices speak out on behalf of those who too often are not recognized, children who are undocumented and stateless in their own mother's country because of a discriminatory nationality law. Children like these may be denied the right to acquire a nationality, and they often are not registered at birth. This lack of documentation directly impacts their ability to acquire a legal identity as outlined in Sustainable Development Goal 16.9, as well as their ability to participate fully and equally in political and economic life as adults. From there, the ramifications of nationality laws that arbitrarily discriminate against women can be quite severe, extending far beyond Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality. The COVID-19 pandemic brought home the importance of access to healthcare for those without legal documentation, yet also illustrated the barriers stateless and undocumented persons face because of fear of detention, deportation, discrimination, and violence. If a mother who cannot pass citizenship to her children fears bringing those children to a vaccine clinic because they do not have legal documentation, how can we hope to truly achieve Sustainable Development Goal 3 on health and well-being? Stateless persons cannot vote, work legally, or participate equally in decision-making, all key elements of democracy. Through our leadership on the Summit for Democracy, the United States seeks to address drivers of inequality and inequity, such as statelessness and disenfranchisement, rooted in gender discrimination. Children without birth registration often face obstacles in attending school, impeding the achievement of our Sustainable Development Goal 4 in support of education for all. In Nepal, where it's estimated that millions of people lack citizenship documentation, in part as a result of discrimination against women in Nepal's nationality law, many families affected by COVID-19 lockdowns couldn't access emergency food distributions, undermining our efforts to advance the Sustainable Development Goal 2 to end hunger and ensure access to food for the most vulnerable. Finally, we all know that stateless persons usually can't be legally employed. For mothers and youth affected by arbitrary discriminatory nationality laws, this can dash hopes for future careers and create serious risks of exploitation and abuse. For the broader society and country, it hinders the attainment of our Sustainable Development Goal 8 on decent work and economic growth. The takeaway for this high-level political forum side event is that discrimination against women in nationality laws is not just an issue of gender equality or just an issue of child protection. It is a human rights issue and an impediment to human and economic development and democracy. For our part, the United States will continue to prioritize working with member states, international organizations, and civil society to end statelessness so we can empower women, help children and youth to realize their full potential, drive social and economic development, and ensure full and fair political representation for all. If we are truly committed to leaving no one behind, we must end statelessness and discrimination. Accelerating our efforts to achieve the 2030 Agenda depends on progress, and I thank the many panelists and participants here today for your efforts toward that end.
We very much appreciate the support of the U.S. government in championing this issue as an essential human rights issue, and to Undersecretary Zaya for her comments. I would like to now welcome to the floor Mr. Mamini Rabinirina, apologies if I'm not doing the best pronunciation. Mr. Rabinirina is a parliamentarian in the National Assembly of Madagascar and the quaestor in charge of good governance and transparency, where he is leading efforts to support a new bill that would eliminate gender discrimination in the nationality law. Due to the connection, I think we might just have the audio. And I'd love to pose the question to you, Mr. Rabinirina. Madagascar enacted reforms to uphold women and men's equal right to pass citizenship to their children at birth in 2016, but that reform did not remove all gender discrimination from the law. Would you tell us a little bit about that process, your current efforts to enact additional reforms, and why these additional reforms are so important? I hope.
Morning. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well, thank you.
Okay, but I think I cannot connect my video.
Well, luckily we can hear you loud and clear, so no worries if you can't connect to the video. We're happy to be able to hear you.
Here I am, there I am. So once again, good morning to everybody, and thank you for your invitation that allows me to take part to that forum today. Like other countries, once a country enacts international or conventional commitments, they must follow steps to update their own codes and laws. These are then among the very first logical acts to do. So Madagascar, according to these international commitments, brought partly changes to its nationality code, especially in 2016 and 2017. And we can see the most important point is the fact that women since then can pass her nationality automatically to her children, regardless of the marital status. That means even single mother can give her nationality to children at birth. So before that period, only men could confer the nationality at birth. One of the specificities of the new law is its retroactivity. However, gender inequality or gender discrimination remains one of the main concerns as far as nationality code is concerned. The reason why other paths and other steps should be done for additional reforms and updates. I shall talk about a few cases. First, about adopted children. Only Malagasy men, Malagasy means people from Madagascar, only Malagasy men can give his nationality to an adopted child. The second point, Malagasy women cannot confer her nationality through marriage. That means marriage does not solve stateless husband's situation. A third situation is that the foreign wife does not become Malagasy automatically. She has to request it, and even may lose her previous citizenship depending on her country laws. The same things for Malagasy women married to a foreigner. Malagasy law makes her keep her Malagasy citizenship unless she expresses her wish to follow the husband. Of course, it would depend on his own country's code also. So the current project, the current bill is a part of the steps, or I will just say the final steps to totally remove gender discrimination in our nationality code. Unfortunately, it has not been easy to insert it in the National Assembly agenda so far. It appears the actual social and political environment in the country do not seem to be a good opportunity yet. In the meantime, we take advantages of the postponement time to lead lobbying towards parliamentarians and policymakers on its purposes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Rabin, Irina, and thank you for your good efforts to promote the additional reforms that are needed to really uphold equal citizenship in Madagascar. And I think I want to emphasize something that you said that I think it might seem, obvious to folks, but it's something that's just so important to recognize. When countries ratify international conventions, this comes with commitments to bring their laws into alignment with these conventions, as you put much more eloquently than me. And this is a perfect example of an area where these steps are needed in order to live up to these commitments that are made, in order to ensure equal citizenship and ensure inclusion of citizens' family in national development and their ability to really fully contribute to societies. So thank you again for your efforts. I would love to welcome now to the floor Alicia Wallace, who is the Executive Director of Equality Bahamas and a human rights defender with expertise in gender, a public educator, and a nonprofit consultant as well from the Bahamas. So Alicia, welcoming you to turn on your video and come to the Zoom floor. And I'd love to ask you if you could tell us a little bit about how civil society is engaging in efforts to promote an end to gender discrimination in nationality laws.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Catherine, for that question. I think we in civil society have so much work to do, and we have so many sort of prongs that we have to use to be able to do this work and do it effectively. So one of the major ways that members of civil society are working on this issue of gender inequality and nationality law is to focus on international mechanisms. So a lot of the time that means United Nations mechanisms. So we're looking at Cdaw, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which looks at nationality in Article 9, the right to equal nationality on an equal basis between women and men, as well as its Article 2, which focuses on the need to eliminate any law that is discriminatory towards women. So there are sort of these two ways that Cdaw is looking at it, one very specifically on nationality, and one that's looking at harmonizing laws and integrating the principle of equality in all of the country's laws, including the Constitution. We're also looking at the Convention on the Rights of a Child and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all of which directly reference the right to a nationality. And it's important to note that when we're using international mechanisms or talking about them, it's really to get policymakers and legislators, politicians, people who are in the Senate, people who are in cabinet, to remember their commitments that they've made through ratification of various declarations and conventions, reminding them of these commitments and holding them to it and saying, hey, we remember, we know you signed this. In the case of the Bahamas, Cdaw was ratified in 1995, and we're still here in this situation, 93, sorry. So making sure that they understand that we understand those commitments, because a lot of times these agreements, these commitments are made in international spaces. These commitments are made in New York, or they're made in Geneva, and people at home don't really have a firm grasp of what those commitments are and what they mean for people in real life. So we have to sort of make a distinction between the way that we talk to technocrats and the people who are dealing with laws and legislation and the way that we're talking to people on the ground. So when we're talking to the general public, recognizing that we need them to also understand these issues and to buy in, we have to be a lot more practical. We have to have a little bit more of an emotional appeal. So that's where the storytelling comes in. And I think Malaysia has done an incredible job of this with really engaging the affected mothers. And they've been finding ways to tell their stories using social media that's absolutely brilliant and something that we are learning from in the Bahamas. And it's a way that we have actually benefited from being a part of the global campaign for equal nationality rights, because it's been a space for us to connect with other civil society members, other NGOs, as well as connecting with international NGOs to learn more about what is working in other spaces, what's not working, and what are some of the tactics and strategies that we can possibly adapt to our own context. So that's already sort of three prongs then. So we have the focus on international mechanisms to talk to the people who are actually making changes to the law and policy, or who we need to do that, even if they're not yet. We have storytelling, as well as data collection and providing education and sensitivity to the general public. And then we have peer learning that's happening at a different level, where we're connecting with one another, with people across different regions, across different parts of the world, to see what we can learn from each other. And also using some of the issues of the day, some of the things that are concerning people within the country. So in the Bahamas over the past few years, there's been a lot of talk about brain drain. You know, there are so many young people who are maybe going off to school to study and then just not coming back. So a part of our conversation is that we can't be upset about young people not coming back home when we're actually turning people away and saying that, if you marry a foreign spouse, if you have a child that's born outside of this country, you're not welcome here. Your child isn't welcome here. We can't really do those two things at the same time because they are contradictory. So these are the three sort of prongs of the work that civil society is doing right now. And of course, there are many ways that we approach these three different strategies. So I've just mentioned a few of them.
Thank you so much, Alicia. We're so lucky to count you as a member of the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights and all of the amazing work that you and Equality Bahamas are doing, just like our coalition members around the globe. So thank you for sharing some of the ways in which you're working. Yeah, I think that this message that you mentioned at the end kind of, when countries are talking about wanting to be appealing places to keep their youth and to avoid brain drain, it's essential that these discriminatory laws be eliminated so that not only citizens' families feel full members and welcome as members of society, but that citizens want to be raising families in places that respect equality and the equality of all citizens. So thank you, Alicia. So now we're going to go to the second round of questions. We're going to kind of frame this as a lightning round because we do want to have time for questions from our participants, from our audience. So I'm going to ask our panelists to try to keep their responses brief for this component. And I would love to turn back now to Dr. Murray. And to put to you, the question of Malaysian women's right to pass nationality to their children has recently been taken up for judicial review. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how this case was brought to court and where it currently stands.
Thanks, Catherine. So it's not really a judicial review. It's a constitutional challenge filed by Family Frontiers along with 6 Malaysian mothers. So we are basically asking that Article 14, 1B, together with Section 1B of Part 2 of the Constitution, be read harmoniously with Article 8.2 of the Federal Constitution, which was amended in 2001 to prohibit gender discrimination. So we're basically asking the government to make the Constitution harmonious because you have one part that says there is no gender discrimination in Malaysia, but on the other hand, you have Article 14 that clearly differentiates men from women, fathers from mothers. So I'm going to share with you a very messy timeline because there were justice, and then there was appeals, and then there was high courts that ruled in our favor, and then the government appealed. So in total, in the last 2 years, the government has appealed at least 7 times. So the government started off with trying to strike out the case altogether. So by saying that this case has no merits, it's frivolous, it's vexatious, it's troublesome, and but the High Court ruled on 6th of May that this case has very strong merits, and it proceeded. And on the 9th of September, the Kuala Lumpur High Court granted Malaysian women equal rights to confer citizenship to their overseas born children. This was one of the sort of the highlights for mothers who are fighting for citizenship rights. Basically, the court said that the 6 plaintiffs and all mothers in similar situations should be able to automatically confer citizenship to their overseas born children. And the court also ordered all relevant authorities to issue citizenship related documents immediately. And the process should be similar to that of fathers. For me, I remember this day very well because it was the eve of my daughter's first birthday. And we were in the deep of COVID, and it was quite sad because it was her first birthday and we couldn't have a party. We couldn't have our family with us. It was literally a party for 3. But I was also at the same time so happy because I thought that I have the best gift for her. This court ruling means that I can confer citizenship to her. But in less than 72 hours, the government filed an appeal to the High Court. And the High Court dismissed the request of the government for a stay of application, and requested that the government respect the court's order, basically. But then the government submitted another appeal, and this time it's the Court of Appeal. But then again, on the 22nd of December, the Court of Appeal came back with a unanimous decision dismissing the government's stay of execution and required that the government issue citizenship documents to all impacted mothers without delay. So yeah, so this is a very messy timeline, because for us, there were so many ups as well as so many downs, and the fight is not over, because the government has again appealed against the court's decision and has not since issued citizenship documents to all other mothers in similar situations. So I just want to say that very quickly that this kind of undue pain and anxiety caused to Malaysian mothers is really unnecessary and has to stop. And I really hope that the government can see this as an opportunity to realize the commitments made to the SDGs and also the commitment made to your citizens. Families like mine, and there were so many families, especially in the last 2 years because of COVID, that found themselves affected by this situation. And families like ours, we cannot build back stronger after COVID, when we have to fight every day for something that is so basic, which is the right to confer citizenship to our children.
Thank you so much, Josil. And I know it's been such a roller coaster for you and all of the affected families. But I do join you in your hope that this is a real opportunity for the government. I know there have been statements and commitments by the government that has expressed their interest to enshrine women's equal right to pass nationality to their children in the Constitution. And there's an opportunity now to move forward and to issue these documents in line with the recent court decision. So we're hopeful that these developments can happen without delay. So thank you. Mr. Iba, I'd like to invite you back to the floor and to ask you to talk a little bit more about the ways in which the UN Refugee Agency is addressing the issue of discrimination and nationality rights, and what you see as the future outlook for women and their families.
Thank you again, Catherine. At UNHCR, we recognize that gender discrimination in nationality laws is a key cause of statelessness. Discrimination in nationality laws reminds us ultimately of the pervasive nature of discrimination against women and its far-reaching consequences. UNHCR has prioritized its response to gender discrimination in nationality laws as part of our mandate to identify and protect stateless persons and to prevent and reduce statelessness. We have done so through, first, information sharing and advocacy, secondly, through support to legal reform, and thirdly, we are planning to step up our effort through a global alliance to end statelessness. I will start with the first area of our work, which is related to advocacy. In 2012, UNHCR issued a key background note on gender discrimination in nationality laws, which serves as a source of information and as an advocacy tool for states and others who wish to advocate for law reform in this particular area. Currently, this note identifies 25 countries across the world which do not give mothers equal rights as fathers to confer nationality to their children. The second area, of course, is related, as I said, to the work that we do on law reform. And what UNHCR has done is to ensure that the issue of gender discrimination in nationality laws is a key component in our global action plan to end statelessness, which is the framework through which we are advancing the goal of our I Belong campaign to end statelessness. Since the launch of this campaign in 2014, UNHCR has successfully advocated together with our partners, some of whom are present in today's event. We managed to advocate for law reforms in Madagascar, and we had a colleague speaking about Madagascar and the progress there, but also in Sierra Leone. These are countries where we now have women who have been allowed to confer nationality to their children on an equal basis as men. Lesotho has also reformed its nationality laws to allow women equal right with men to confer nationality to their spouses. Currently, UNHCR is working actively to encourage similar law reforms in different countries, including in Kiribati, in Malaysia, and in Togo. UNHCR is continuing to work closely with other UN agencies, and I'm very pleased that we have a number of colleagues from different UN agencies with us today. We are working closely with UN Women, with UNICEF, with OACHR, as well as with your own organization, Catherine, the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, to raise awareness, to advocate with laws, with law and policy makers, and to encourage individuals affected by discrimination in nationality laws. And as part of the Secretary General's recently launched Our Common Agenda initiative, which calls for accelerated action to achieve gender equality, women's participation, and the empowerment of women and girls in all domains, and which also calls for ending statelessness, UNHCR is working with many entities to establish an action-oriented and multi-stakeholder global alliance to end statelessness. This alliance, which we are hoping to launch next year, will seek to tackle gender discrimination in nationality laws as a key component of the realization of the transformative vision of the common agenda. But allow me to end, Catherine, by stressing that our work at UNHCR on nationality rights and on statelessness is done in close partnership with persons with lived experiences of statelessness, including those who have been affected by gender discrimination in nationality laws. For us, the engagement with stateless persons and with organizations led by stateless persons is a policy imperative. And this is why we are so pleased to have with us in this event colleagues who are sharing their personal and lived experiences of discrimination based on nationality laws. Over, back to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much for your comments. And yes, we know it's very clear, and if we look at all of the work that's being done, and we thank you for the good work that the UN Refugee Agency is doing in partnership with its sister agencies as well. We know that the most effective efforts to end gender discrimination and nationality laws are those that are really being done in partnership and with leadership from affected persons and families. So we really appreciate your efforts in that regard. And I'm really glad as well to hear you mention Togo. We've been following developments in Togo for some time now, for several years, since there's been kind of some more development on this issue. And we understand that there is a draft bill that would eliminate gender discrimination in the nationality code there. So we are eagerly awaiting an opportunity to celebrate reforms taking place in Togo as well. So I think this is actually a perfect segue to turn back to our esteemed colleague from Madagascar, Mr. Rabin Irina. I'm looking to you because you are helping to lead efforts right now, as I mentioned before, to pass a new bill that would eliminate all gender discriminatory provisions and enshrine gender equality in Madagascar's nationality code, as you mentioned, both including women and men's equal right to confer on adopted children, which was a provision that was missing from the previous reforms, and also women and men's equal right to confer nationality on a non-citizen spouse. So, I want to hear from you about what do you think is needed to pass the current bill? What will convince policymakers to support this reform? And if you're optimistic for its passage? I know that's kind of a big question, which I'm asking you to respond to in a relatively brief period of time, but turning the floor over to you. Hope we haven't lost connection. Mr. Revan Mirina, can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
You hear me?
I can hear you well, thank you.
First of all, we should not forget the fact that in the National Assembly here in Madagascar, political trends remain very important despite each parliamentarian's understanding and way of reading. Intends to play on the meaning of one or few keywords would become a blocking situation for the whole process. So I think what we need to do is, as I already mentioned sooner, is to schedule technical lobbyings towards those parliamentarians, maybe through each group. Why not through concert committees and commissions, and pay a particular attention to the opportunity. I am deeply sorry to talk about that, but I understand how we do work here, especially at that very difficult period. However, I hope there are still ways to achieve these goals, even though it may take longer time than we thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, good, we have the connection back here. Yes, I think your approach in really engaging different parliamentary committees and raising awareness of how this issue intersects with their area of focus on their committees is a really smart approach, and something that we've seen with our coalition members in other countries engaging parliamentarians and the various blocs and groups in such a manner. So thanks for sharing that approach. I'd like to welcome back Alicia to tell us really, what does civil society need in order to do what it does best, which is to mobilize action to achieve reforms. We've seen feminist and civil society organizations really leading efforts and mobilizing policymakers. So I know lots of folks that are here with us today want to know, what does civil society need? So turning it to you.
I definitely have to start with the F word, because we need funding. And I know this is something that people talk about all the time, and it sort of gets glossed over or said in a rush, or people kind of roll their eyes and say, okay, yeah, they want more money. But that is really what it takes to sustain the work that we're doing, to sustain movements, and to actually be able to increase the impact of the work that we're doing, because then we're able to invest more. And when I say invest, I mean more than money, I mean people's time and expertise. Another thing that we really need is technical expertise. And we have been really fortunate being a part of the global campaign and forming this coalition to be able to learn from each other and be connected to INGOs that have lawyers, that have people who have studied international human rights, to be able to learn from them and to participate in trainings. Like the global campaign had a youth advocacy training last year, mid-pandemic, which was incredible, particularly for people who were new to organizations and new to this particular movement, to be able to learn really quickly about some of the international mechanisms, about some of the strategies that have been used on the ground in different parts of the world. But we actually need more of those spaces for us to be able to share our learnings and to be able to learn together and innovate together. And what we really need is more innovative thinking. And we know that we come up with better ideas, better solutions, better ways to implement them when we're actually able to engage with one another. And unfortunately, the pandemic has really limited us in being able to be in the same physical space and feed off of each other's energy. And it's not quite the same virtually, although it does enable us to connect more frequently and at a lower cost. I think we also need to have more engaged citizens. And this is probably one of the most difficult parts of the work. We can talk all day to decision makers, we can talk all day to the press, but we have to be able to move people on the ground. Building that political will is critical. We know that people in positions of power want to maintain those positions of power, and that means that the decisions that they make are the ones that they think are going to get them elected again, the ones that they think are going to keep them in office. So we have to actually make a case for ourselves. We have to prove to them that doing the right thing, that promoting and upholding and expanding human rights and women's human rights is a way to gain the favor of the people. And that requires us to be engaged with people on the ground. We need to access more spaces and more different spaces. So a lot of times we get stuck kind of talking to each other or just talking to the press, screaming out into the void, help, we need more rights. We need to ensure that women are able to pass on citizenship to their children. We need to ensure that people can live in their home country, in the home country of their mothers. They need to access education. They need to access healthcare. But who are the people that are missing? Who are the people who are not hearing our messages? How can we gain access to educational institutions? And that's including high schools and colleges and universities. How do we get access to service organizations like maybe the Rotary or Kiwanis? How do we talk to these people who are also influential in their own spheres, usually in the private sector, in the business space, small micro businesses? How do we access faith-based organizations where a lot of people get the information that they actually trust, where people listen to, the people that they're connecting with on a weekly basis, sometimes multiple times a week for different programs. So a lot of what we need is people and people who will give us access to new spaces and new groups of people, ways to communicate with them, to provide them with the information that we need them to have, and ways to actually get them involved. So it's one thing to teach people and to sensitize people, but we have to come up with ways that make it easy and impactful for people to take action with us.
Thanks, Alicia. I think it's really important, these points that you raised about how we can really broaden the base of support, and from different actors, different community groups, different religious groups, youth, as you mentioned. And I think for all of us to get creative about how we can really broaden that base of support. And, when you mention funding, and, it can be a tricky thing to discuss, but, from my end, seeing what coalition members like Equality Bahamas, like Family Frontiers, has been able to do with really a modest amount of funding. I mean, it's really extraordinary. I mean, in Malaysia now you have, a real conversation and progress towards a constitutional amendment, towards, really changing citizenship rights with support that was really quite a modest sum. So I think it's really important to emphasize that women's rights organizations on the ground, civil society organizations on the ground, they need our support. So I think it's a good time to now invite all of our panelists to join us back on the screen, to turn on your videos if you're able. We can turn now to our questions from the audience. And I encourage you, colleagues in the audience, to add your questions in the Q&A function. So I think I'd like to start now. This is a great question, and I think it's something that perhaps thinking about the campaign in Malaysia and also in the Bahamas, maybe Josil and Alicia, if you want to share some comments on this, and of course others are welcome to jump in as well. But one attendee asked if there's any further information you could share about the ways women shared their stories on social media that were successful. Were there any ways of mitigating possible stigmatization with that approach? So Josil or Alicia, I don't know if you want to come in first on that question.
Maybe a quick one for me, Alicia, that you can jump in. I think we started to put ourselves out there a little bit more. Before that, we always tried to protect mothers and our children by not sharing our story or not making it too personal. But we realized that until people know that there is a person behind this issue, or there are people affected, and so we started to, I think mothers individually, we started to hold our children and share our story. We started to write more. We started to be very personal. And I think that has really helped, because people now realize that, yeah, this is another person and this could happen to me if my situation was just a little bit different. So yeah, I think that was how we've started to do things differently, which has been quite helpful.
Yeah, the story sharing is something that we've admired that Family Frontiers has done. It hasn't been something that Equality Bahamas has done, or any members really of the group that have been trying to advance this particular set of rights. So it was, I think, very instructive to us and very inspiring that people were in Malaysia and still are telling their own stories and personalizing the issue. And I think that's critical, because it's really easy to talk about things theoretically, you know, these sort of invisible people who are facing these different trials and tribulations, this really technical thing about the law, because in the Bahamas, it's a bit complicated because this inequality is embedded in our constitution. And to change it is more than a stroke of a pen, unless we can do some sort of interim things with legislation, but to change the constitution, we have to have a referendum, and it requires more than 50% of the people who vote to agree to the change. So it's really complicated, and people don't understand why we need to change the constitution. They don't understand why it matters that we don't just do it in legislation. They don't get why they need to, or how they can actually educate themselves enough to understand that, oh, it is okay to change the constitution. We're supposed to do that as we learn more and as culture shifts and we start to focus more on people's rights. And that's all fine and good, but we need those stories. We need to see people who are having these experiences. And I think one of the tricky things in the Bahamas in particular is that people were seeing it as a middle class issue and not something that's important for the grassroots, people who are experiencing poverty and having different types of challenges. So it's really tricky to find the right people to be the face of a campaign like this in a country that's majority Black and where race is really tied to class in a lot of different ways. You don't want to put forward white Bahamian women who have, you know, gone to school in Germany, you know, because that's seen as a privilege, and like your problem is a privilege to the general public. So this is something that we're still working through and thinking through how to do it and how to do it well and in ways that won't backfire. And of course, we can't really safeguard against all of it, but we want to do it in ways that would be effective and impactful in support of the campaign and in support of the changes that we want to see.
Thanks, Alicia. And I know, Josel, you talked about in our conversation, kind of linking to Alicia's point, that oftentimes we see that sometimes, you know, there's a huge population of, you know, of underprivileged folks, of folks that are really suffering, that are affected by these laws. But sometimes it's even more challenging for some of those folks to position themselves in the way that you've been able to speak out about this. We talked about people that are working for daily, you know, wages, that can't get away from their job, that need to take time off from work to just go and fill out, you know, additional documentation and go to government offices to try and secure these documents, and might be in more precarious situations in terms of their ability to kind of, you know, speak out in these types of forums. So thanks for elevating this. And Patrick, I see your hand raised as well. I'd love to invite you to come in here also.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you indeed, Catherine. And I wanted to certainly echo the point that you just made, but also those that were made by Dr. Murray and Ms. Wallace, and just say that for us at UNHCR, we feel the same, that at the end of the day, the fight to end statelessness or to end discrimination in nationality laws is really about recalling the truly human nature of these issues. That at the end of the day, we are talking about members of the human family to whom we all have responsibilities, and taking these issues from invisibility to making it visible. This is why one of the recent feature of our campaign to end statelessness was really around visibility. The second issue that I also want to raise in relation to this very point of the voices of the people affected is really around agency. Recalling that the people and those who are affected by these issues are not voiceless, and that it is their struggle, it is their voices, it is their engagement that is so fundamental to the progress that we are making, and really listening to them and ensuring that we all partake in this struggle that they are instrumental to taking forward, I think is very important. So truly appreciative of the views that were just shared.
Thank you. And I think turning to another question that was raised by one of our colleagues, one of our audience members, how do we implement international commitments signed by our states in order to really impact people on the ground? And this, our colleague also mentioned the fact of folks sometimes in countries not being familiar with the commitments that have been made, or what is actually linked with a child's right to acquire nationality, a woman's right to pass nationality. So perhaps I might first, Mr. Rabin Nirina, I know that you've been working to kind of build support for these reforms, and I'm wondering to what degree you may have highlighted or emphasized Madagascar's commitments under international law, and to what degree you've been kind of trying to raise this and with any public engagement as well. So I don't know if you want to come in on this question. Mr. Rabin Nirina, or if we have a connection
Yes,
issue.
I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. Please go ahead.
I'm so sorry for the case of Madagascar, because in one hand, I can say that we are not far anymore from the final goal. But in the other hand, we still have blocking situations concerning the main policy of the country itself. I don't want to say that it is the country itself, I mean the government itself, which does not respect the commitment, the signature that have been done before within international commitments, but somewhere there is a lack of will, really, to prioritize such a kind of reforms. So I think that is the main point. The government itself not yet convinced that it is among the priorities that should be treated for the time being.
Thank you for sharing this. I do see that we have some hands raised as well in the audience. So I think that will require our admin on the back end to allow someone to speak, but I think this should work. So I see Mariam Al-Sulayati. If my colleagues could help unmute Mariam, I'd like to invite you to pose your question. Please go ahead. Oh, I think you are on mute.
Mariam, if you click unmute, you should be, oh, there we go.
السلام عليكم. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay, I would بس حبيت أستفسر عن إذا في المستقبل بناء القطريات بيتجنسون إن شاء الله وأزواجهم.
Thank you. And maybe we could ask our colleagues our translators to put the question in chat if that's possible.
هل في المستقبل إن شاء الله في احنا نبي نتكلم عن حق الزوج، حق القطرية في منح الزوج الجنسية وأبنائها. فهمت السؤال أخوي؟
Sorry, I should have clarified that it is a little difficult for us to.
ألو؟
Hi, thanks, Miriam. It's a little challenging for us to translate on the spot, but I've asked my colleague to translate the question for us.
حق الزوجة في نقل الجنسية لزوجها وأبنائها.
Thank you, Miriam. I'll ask our colleague to translate your question, so I can pose to the panelists. I regret that I can't speak Arabic, but while we're waiting for that translation, I would like to ask Sharif Diallo if you would like to pose your question to our panelists, and hopefully we can get that translation in the meantime. Thank you.
Sorry, Catherine. Bashar has interpreted it in the channel. Sorry for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And apologies, Miriam. So we have here, sorry, I don't see it in the chat, Yasmin. Perhaps if you can
He did it simultaneously. Sorry for that.
Okay. While I'm finding that, perhaps we can invite Sharif to the floor to pose his question. Apologies, colleague. I see a question to Deputy Director Iba. Since gender discrimination and nationality laws is a major cause for statelessness, what do you think about UNHCR's prioritization for ending gender discrimination and nationality laws as part of the solutions to end statelessness in countries that discriminate on this basis?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question indeed. And as I was able to explain in my second intervention, indeed, UNHCR considers this to be a priority issue. So this is why globally, we've made it one of the priorities in our global campaign to end statelessness. And at country level, our country operations support and work closely with government, civil society, and other actors to advocate on this issue, to support legislative reform, as well as to share information on the fact that ending statelessness will not be possible without addressing discrimination in nationality laws where they do exist. So certainly this is one of our priorities. It does not mean that it is an easy task, and this is why we really need UN agencies to work with us, other stakeholders, civil society, and members of parliament, and this is what we are seeking to do. And we see the upcoming launch of the Global Alliance to End Statelessness as a formidable opportunity to take this agenda forward. And as I said, this Global Alliance is expected to be launched next year, and through which we are aiming to mobilize different stakeholders to support our effort to end statelessness, including by addressing discrimination in nationality laws.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And I see we also have a question. If our colleague Ro Kwa could keep your question quite brief, we'll have to be turning soon for closing comments from our panelists. But Ro, if you would like to unmute yourself and pose your question, please go ahead. Ro, if you would like to unmute yourself, you should have that ability right now.
Do you hear me?
Yes, please. Thank you. Please pose your question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to share the having a statelessness in our country. So I'm a Rohingya Muslim. You will be aware of the Rohingya crisis in the Myanmar country. Still now the stateless policy in the field levels, really difficulties there to overcome the national issue. And the point of the stillness of the citizenship issue having more and more violated gender rights. I would like to highlight it because of the most of the women wanted to go about or to get the higher level education. They couldn't get a chance to study higher level education, and they couldn't go freedom of movement. That's kind of happening in the current situations. I would like to request that why didn't the UN organization still stopping the statelessness in every country, or what like as the international, especially the Myanmar, because of their really complicated issue. Now after the military coup, now they are day-to-day increasing the gender violation issue in the current levels. You could be seeing the media, especially the live masquerade in the military department to the women. Really, if I saw that kind of video, I'm really scared and fair. I would like to request, please try to stop statelessness and to be equally citizenship right law implemented in our Myanmar country, especially to be restore Rohingya refugee rights and international displaced person rights. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to share our current situation.
Thank you, Ro. And I know all of us, as we've been, watching the unbelievable suffering that's been faced by the Rohingya community, our heart breaks. And so thank you for elevating this issue in our conversation today. We know that, stateless populations everywhere in the Rohingya are suffering a great deal. And I would love, Patrick, I see your hand raised, and welcome your comments on this. And then we will be turning to closing comments from our panelists, but please go ahead, Patrick. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Catherine. Just to very briefly indicate that UNHCR has over the years expressed strong concern in relation to the stateless situation of Rohingya persons. And right now, UNHCR does support those Rohingya persons that are currently refugees in different countries in Asia and further afield. And certainly it's an issue that is of key concern, one of our priority engagement. And I just want to emphasize that we truly are committed to supporting protection and solution for Rohingya people, and this is something that UNHCR does with a number, with the support of governments in the region and more globally.
Thank you, Patrick, and apologies to our colleague Miriam for having the delay on the translation of your question around the ability of Qatari mothers to confer citizenship on their children. I know this has been something that affected families in Qatar have been particularly raising on sharing their stories on social media. And we are engaging in a process, including with the UN Refugee Agency and UNICEF, as well as I know the Arab League has been active on this, and really working to elevate the need for reforms in the region, including in Qatar. And it's a process that we are hopeful that there will be continued steps to address this discrimination. So thank you for raising the particular concerns of affected families and mothers in Qatar. I would like to first just quickly say that if we weren't able to answer your question, if you wanted to pose a question, please feel free to pose your question to us after the event on social media. I'm putting our Twitter account in the chat. You can reach us on Facebook, and we would be really happy to answer publicly your question as well. So please feel free to use that forum. I know we're at time, so I want to ask our panelists to just very quickly, if you can take under a minute for any last closing comments. Patrick, you're on screen, so I'll invite you to go ahead, and then we will close our event. So over to you.
No, thank you very much indeed, Catherine. I would like to, of course, thank the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Right and all the organizers for this remarkable event. This event reminds us, all of us, that nationality is not only a legal problem, that it is also a human issue, and above all, this event reminded us that nationality right and equal nationality right is an issue of sustainable development. Ensuring that everyone counts and ensuring that we leave no one behind requires that we address the core issues that are behind discrimination in nationality right, including gender-related discrimination. And this is why UNHCR is seeking to advance our work on statelessness through this important lens of ending discrimination in nationality laws. So thank you very much, and you can all certainly count on UNHCR as an ally in this global struggle to ensure that everybody counts and that women's rights also matter.
Thank you. And now quickly turning to Mr. Rabin Nirina for your last closing comments. If you're able to connect your audio, Mr. Rabin Nirina. Okay, well, we're trying to get that connection back. Perhaps I could turn to Alicia.
I think it's important for us to remember that we are talking about laws, we're talking about discrimination, we're talking about a need for gender equality, but at the center of that is people, the people who are affected by gender unequal nationality laws. And we need to make these changes for those people. And to do that, we have to be able to effectively engage other people, people who are not directly impacted. And that means that we have to build empathy, we have to share knowledge, and we have to make very technical information very accessible to people. So one of the ways that Equality Bahamas is doing that is we have a Cdaw speaker series that we're doing. So every month we have an expert who comes and talks about one article of Cdaw. So in the lead up to our 30th anniversary of ratification in October of 2023, we will have one article per month. And by the end, in October next year, we will have completed all of the articles to make it really accessible to people, to help people to understand, sort of kind of hold and feel each of these articles and get how they relate to their lives. And of course, this is sort of a big picture thing, but it actually helps people to understand rights and how they impact individuals on the ground, people who could be their neighbors, coworkers, friends, and could be them someday. So just keeping in mind that we have to keep this human connection and this understanding that we're talking about people's lives and their ability to not just access opportunities and get across barriers, but to have equality in outcome within their everyday lives.
Thanks, Alicia. And I'll try to turn one more time to Mr. Rabin Nirina. Are you able to connect your audio? Do let us know in chat if you're able to get back the connection. So then I want to turn to Dr. Murray, to Josil. Please, your closing comments.
Thank you. For me, I just want to say that I'm one of thousands of mothers in Malaysia who are affected by this. I may not, my story may not be the most devastating, but we have so many really sad cases among our mothers, and I wish I had the time to highlight each and every one of them because they are so important, and everyone is facing their own anxieties, and so I just wanted to say that We have single mothers, we have mothers in abusive relationships, we have mothers who have recently died, leaving the children then with no way to get citizenship because your only sole link to Malaysia is now not here. And so there are so many different stories, and all of them are so important. And I just wanted to say organizations like Family Frontiers, who have been fighting and supporting each and every one of us, cannot do their work without funds. It really saddens me to know that grassroots women's rights organizations need to think about who gets to go for meetings today, who gets to go, who gets to travel to the ministry today. It shouldn't be that shouldn't be an issue for them, but funding is so tight. And yeah, I wish there was a way that we could sort of globally fundraise for these women's organizations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mami Nivila, are you able to come in? I think we may have lost connection. So I just want to really thank our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing your experiences and your perspective on this critical human rights issue. I think it's so fantastic that everyone was coming back to this as being a human issue. This is not just about some, lofty commitments that are made. This is an issue that impacts people, individuals and their families every day. I want to really thank our event co-sponsors, Equality Now, the Permanent Mission of the United States to the UN, UNICEF, the UN Refugee Agency, and UN Women. I want to thank our interpreters for your fantastic work. I want to thank all of our audience members for your attention, and apologies that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions. I do encourage you to please post your questions on our social accounts so we can answer, and others can hear your questions and the responses as well. So thank you so much to everyone. I think that today's conversation really underscored that we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without upholding gender equality in nationality laws. Happily, we are seeing developments in regions and countries across the world, and this is a man-made problem that causes unnecessary suffering, but it can be solved with the political will. This is something that can be solved with the political will. So thank you to everyone here, and we look forward to continuing the conversation online as well, and to working with all of you to achieve a world in which all nationality laws uphold citizens' equality without gender-based discrimination or any discrimination at all. Thank you, and best wishes for the rest of your day.